Okay, so you brought us some really insightful material today. We're looking at the New York City mayoral primary. And wow, it really delivered a surprising outcome, didn't it?
It certainly did. And our mission for this deep dive is basically to figure out not just who won, but what this victory actually means, for local politics there, but also maybe for wider shifts in how people are thinking.
Right, because the city election, especially New York, can tell us a lot.
Exactly. And it's all based on the sources you shared with us.
Absolutely. And the central figure here is Zohran Mamdani. He's just become the first Muslim ever to win the Democratic primary for New York City mayor. I mean, that's historic.
It really is monumental, and the sources are clear he didn't just squeak by. He won against a very, very well-known political figure, former Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Cuomo, right. That's a huge name to beat.
Huge. With about 95% of the votes counted, Mamdani had over 43%. Cuomo was back at 36%, and Cuomo conceded, basically saying, it wasn't our night, he won. Pretty definitive.
That's quite the upset.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit more about Zohran Mamdani himself. What did the sources say?
Well, he's young, 33, described as a progressive Democrat. He's already serving in the state legislative assembly, representing Queens.
Okay, so he has some political experience.
He does. And an interesting background, too. Born and raised in Uganda, his parents are Indian. That brings a different perspective, you'd imagine.
And he had some significant backing, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. The sources highlight support from big national progressive figures like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That tells you something right there.
It suggests this wasn't just a local race, but tapped into a broader movement.
Exactly. But what's also really fascinating from the material is how he won. It wasn't a typical campaign.
How so?
It's described more like a social movement, really driven by what they called a volunteer army and heavily reliant on social media. Less about traditional big money, maybe.
Interesting. So maybe a new kind of political organizing blueprint, leveraging that digital grassroots energy.
Could be. And this approach really seemed to connect with a huge issue for New Yorkers. The sheer cost of living. That was his core platform.
Ah, yes. What specifically was he proposing?
Things like free buses, free kindergartens, and importantly, strict rent control, trying to stop rent increases. The sources mention examples like a 3-bedroom apartment hitting $6,000 a month.
Wow, $6,000. You can see why people feel the city is becoming unlivable, as the sources put it. That message must have resonated.
Deeply, it seems. But this victory hasn't been without controversy or scrutiny. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz points out his candidacy rattles the pro-Israel establishment.
Okay, and there were accusations of anti-Semitism.
Yes, though Haaretz itself calls those accusations unfounded. But it's a sensitive point, especially in New York City with its very large Jewish population, nearly 1 million people.
So what exactly are his stated views according to the sources, particularly regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Well, according to Avi Silberstein, a scholar cited in the materials, Mamdani affirms Israel's right to exist. But, crucially, he insists on equal rights for Palestinians. He's also been critical of Israeli policies and has described the war on Gaza as genocide.
So, pretty strong language there.
Yes. And Silberstein suggests the real fear among Mamdani's opponents isn't so much about harm to the Jewish community itself, it's more about political influence.
What kind of influence?
A potential weakening of the traditionally strong pro-Israel stance within the Democratic Party and maybe U.S. politics more broadly. The concern seems to be that he might, prioritize the concerns of all New Yorkers, including Palestinians affected by the conflict, rather than just sticking to an uncritically pro-Israel line.
Right, a shift in priorities. So, coming back, what's the biggest takeaway here? What does this potentially signal beyond just NYC politics?
Well, what's really striking is how this local win seems to mirror or connect with a broader shift in public opinion that the sources mention. Haaretz cites recent polls.
What do they show?
They apparently show sympathy for Israelis is at an all-time low, while support for Palestinians is higher than it's been since 2001. So Mamdani's win doesn't just reflect this shift. Maybe it could even help accelerate it. It signals something is changing.
It really is amazing how a single city primary can suddenly feel like it's reflecting and maybe even influencing these huge national and international conversations.
Absolutely. It leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What does a victory like this signal for the future of politics in diverse cities? And, how might it challenge the old guard, the traditional political establishments, to really adapt to changing populations and changing views?
A really important question to keep in mind as this story develops. Definitely something for all of us to think about.